Sorry, John. Hello. Hello, good morning, buongiorno and welcome. My name is Michaela Tai and I am the Head of Visual Arts at Creative Australia, and we are delighted to be partnering today with ArtReview to present a series of talks that expand on the remarkable work by Archie Moore, Kith and Kin, who is joining us on stage at the moment. We're really lucky to be presenting this work in the Australia Pavilion this year and working with both Archie and curator Ellie Buttrose. This year is a particularly special year for Venice for Australia, as we are commissioning for the very first time as Creative Australia, following our transition from the Australia Council for the Arts into a bigger, bolder champion and investor in the arts and creativity for our country. And this couldn't be more perfectly exemplified by Kith and Kin. We are also extremely proud that 4 First Nations artists are part of this year's Biennale. In addition to the remarkable work of Archie Moore, who joins us here on stage, in the Australia Pavilion we've also got the work of Namanapu Maimora White and Mylene Gilson in the main exhibition. And over the course of the week, I'm sure you've seen many things and engaged with the wonderful program curated by Brooke Andrew and called Indigenous Voices on Tuesday. It is really fantastic to have this number of First Nations artists showcased on the world stage here at Venice. Before we start off with our conversation between Archie and Ellie, I'd like to introduce you to Djon Mundine OAM. Djon is a proud Bundjalung man from the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, Australia. He is a curator, writer, artist and activist, and is celebrated as a foundational figure in the criticism and exhibition of contemporary Aboriginal art. Djon was awarded the Creative Australia 2020 Red Ochre Award for a lifetime achievement. He has held many senior curatorial positions in both national and international institutions and is currently an independent curator of contemporary Indigenous art. And most importantly for today, he has been a trusted guide, confidant and advisor to Archie, Ellie and the team throughout the development of Kith and Kin. Thank you, Djon.
I hope this boomerang comes back and works. No, I'm just good. My standing up would not add too much to the vision, so I'll just stay seated, being a short person. My name, as the introduction was, my name is Djon Mundine, or Djon Mundine, and I come from the Bundjalung people of northern New South Wales, from the upper Clarence, really, Clarence River in New South Wales. I came to meet Archie some time ago, about 20 years ago or something. I had to come all the way to Venice to try to get the $20 back off him that I loaned him, but anyway, it was a long trip. Sorry. But it's really good to be here, and so we've kept up a conversation here and there, and a serious conversation, and sort of picked up our own particular peccadillos of research and obsessions, and our own forms of seeing the world. And Archie, I've really admired the way he looked at the world and saw things. So I was very happy to be in conversation for all that period and see a number of exhibitions. His artworks become larger, more intensely structured and more interesting and profound, even in a way that I knew he had. Lots of people saw this in him, and were so happy that we got here now. And he had a curator. Curators are supposed to, the basis is curators are supposed to care, and Ellie and I both care greatly for that person. As we say, the thing is, you can never allow the artist to look bad in public, as much as they quite often try to. we care like parents in that way. So I'm going to leave the stage. Yeah, I'm going to leave the stage. So I've just had this grandfather role or uncle role. So people call, in Aboriginal terms, you're always called an older person, your uncle. And the OAM really stands for Old Aboriginal Man. And so I'm the Old Aboriginal Man, uncle, the man from Uncle. And I'll leave the stage on that note.
Do you want to say why Archie's work is important?
Yes. I think, well, we've had Venice, it's an interesting place in the sense of this institution of these Olympics of cultural practice, as I've described them, because you come here representing your country, so to speak. And how apt is it that Archie's went to Kith and kin about we are related, and we're related more broadly. And in historical Aboriginal social practice, you are related to everyone else in the world, and you're related to every other living organism in the world. And your adventure in life is to find out what's living and what's unliving, mentally if not physically. But that's what makes the work so great. I think art needs to talk to the site. You have to have a relationship with that site and think about it and leave a legacy of sort here. And I think the way his Kith and kin has put this together about how we're, in one sense, we're all related to each other. And even though he was on the reverse side, the other side of the world, he lived virtually in a very early Venetian landscape of small islands in the mouth of a river somewhere. We tried to put that into the acknowledgement to country, to say we wanted to acknowledge the people of the lagoon of Venice and how we are like them. We're refugees in a sense. Initially we're displaced people. We speak another language and see things differently, like most artists do, and struggle to speak with our own words to a wider concept of living and socialising and being with each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Djon. And thank you so much for your support throughout the project. It's been so important to Archie and I. So as Michaela mentioned, my name's Ellie Buttrose. I'm the curator of Archie Moore's project, Kith and Kin, and we're just going to give you a kind of short introduction to the work. And so I guess Archie, as Djon mentioned, it's a genealogical chart that takes over the whole of the Australia Pavilion. Could you talk about your interest in researching your family and how you kind of what was the kind of underlying research that went into the project?
I've been on the genealogical site called ancestry.com. You might be aware of that. So I began building a tree on there 4 years ago. Both my parents didn't talk about their families much at all, so I was a bit intrigued about who they were, and I started looking into several different archives, like the state archives in the state I live in, called Queensland, and also the New South Wales archive, where both sides of my Aboriginal family have records kept. So then I also during this project we had 2 other researchers involved, which had greater access to these records than I had because of being a researcher, and also looked into places I wasn't aware of. They had an archive, like the Department of Veteran Affairs, where my father, who served in World War II, had some material on him. And he also was in a secret society called the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes. So I found the former secretary of that. It's like a fraternal society that's not really active anymore. But I found the secretary, and I asked him if there was an archive, and he said yes, there was, and asked me who my father's name was and which lodge he attended, and I gave him that information, and then he wouldn't talk to me again. So kept it a secret. So yes, I built the tree out of the information I currently have on as many members that I know of. I have up to 3,800 people. And then I've extended that tree back 65,000 years, which is the amount of time Aboriginal people have been on the continent of Australia.
And could you talk about the difference, maybe talk about your father's background and your mother's background? You have both convict heritage and Kamilaroi and Bigambul heritage, and how you there's different material in the archive because of these different histories.
Yeah, so my father was a white person who has English and Scottish heritage. So my great-great-grandfather on my father's side stole some corduroy in London, which Ellie is swearing here so, and some other materials, and went to trial and got had a death sentence, but during the trial got downgraded to transportation to Australia. So that's how that begins. And so he got a ticket of leave and a pardon, and was then able to marry another woman who was a convict also. Then acquired several properties and kind of lived it.
How did they acquire the property?
Well, let's say in receipt of stolen goods, I like to think. So my grandfather also travelled from around where my great-great-grandfather was at Wollumbai in New South Wales. And my grandfather, which I never met because he died 20 years before I was born, because my father was a very old person when I was born. But my grandfather had travelled to a small place called Kulatai in New South Wales, and there was a thing called land ballots where land was given away like in a lottery, but this land was on Kamilaroi country, which is my mother's side, and my grandfather was a lucky receiver of that land, which was at one point must have been taken by force, removed or killed the Aboriginal people that were originally there.
And there's also, I guess, different material on your mother's side because they came under different laws than non-Indigenous people in Australia. Could you talk a little bit about the material that you found there?
Yeah, so my Aboriginal side existing in the archives because they are Aboriginal and came under certain acts that were laws exclusively for Aboriginal people. I found correspondence between the police and this official called the Protector of Aboriginals, who provided no protection, of course. They were trying to locate my grandparents. They seemed to be on the run, crossing the borders back and forward. So under surveillance, and they also needed permission to marry. They couldn't just go, need approval from this protector. So, and also there was mention of my grandfather's salary. He was illiterate, so he couldn't read or write. But they also controlled his wages. Like, he didn't have full access to that money. And also during this project, I got the researcher found my great uncle, which is on the left, William Cleven. This is a photograph in the prisoner register for a very notoriously tough jail in Brisbane. It was called Bogger Road Jail. So that was the first time I saw a photo of him. It's like, what's it, in the 30s, 1933. He was involved in a fight with his father, dispute about wages, and accidentally killed him and went to jail for 9 months.
And you've also included documents that in the space that aren't directly from your family but are about the way that laws and the carceral system has impinged on First Nations lives. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I think, it's a lot easier for Aboriginal people to get caught up in the justice system. I think they're more likely to, or every step of the way is disproportionately put upon them, like during the arrest and during the trial and during the sentencing and incarceration and parole. And Aboriginal people are more likely to go to jail for trivial offences like littering or swearing in public or something like that. So non-Indigenous people would not go to jail for those things. More likely to die while in custody. And police custody includes police pursuits as well.
So there's more than 500 coronial inquests into First Nation deaths in custody, and they date from 1991 when there was a independent review of why there were so many First Nation deaths in custody. And could you tell us a little bit about why it was important to include them, and also there's a lot of blank documents?
So in the middle of the installation there's over 500 documents floating above a pool of water, and these are independent investigation into why Aboriginal people are dying in custody, called a Royal Commission. They provided over 300 recommendations to address this issue, but nothing's been implemented yet. So there's no eagerness to fix this problem. It's an ongoing problem. And also within those documents I've got 19 of my own family from the archives I've been looking into. They're all in the catalogue to read. The coronial reports are online, public available reports, and I've redacted the names of the people to out of respect for those people who have passed away. And if you look into the pool, you'll see the tree reflected in the water and places them in the same plane as these documents as a way to show that they're not just a statistic. There's human beings with families as well, and part of, as John said, this family tree that includes everyone. And if we go back 3,000 years, we all have a common ancestor, so we should be respectful of each other. Yeah.
And so you have this immense family tree that takes up all the walls, but there are some holes in it, and in a sense we can see that the pool, these black holes on the walls, but the pool underneath the documents is also this kind of black void. Could you speak to the other black voids in the family tree?
Yeah, so there's 3 holes in the tree representing a massacre. So like when white people came onto the land and wanted to take that land, they killed people and moved them away. And there's also represents a viral outbreak like smallpox, which came with the European people that arrived, and Aboriginal people had no immunity to that disease or any built-up resistance, so it spread quite quickly and decimated people. Another hole could represent just a loss of information in the record, where it's been destroyed deliberately or accidentally, lost, or information that hasn't been recorded in the first place that's about these people.
And then if we really kind of zoom in on the names in the wall, could you kind of talk us through, some people have multiple spellings of their names, sometimes there's people with first and last names, and then singular names. Could you talk about that transition?
Yeah, so at the bottom of the tree there's, on my Aboriginal side, they'll have 2 or 3 names, like a full name for a person, and usually European names. And then as we go a bit higher, they've got one diminutive name, or like a pet name or a child-like name that's a shortened version of a full name, like Tommy instead of Thomas, or Billy instead of William. You kind of look at the record and you become aware that they must be an Aboriginal person because they don't have the full name. And then above that there's no name at all, just a descriptor for like a blood quantity kind of thing, like full blood or half caste, black fellow, black male, that kind of thing. So it becomes more depersonalised. And this is the language I see on the records I've been looking at in the archives. And then as we get further up the tree, it becomes a singular name again, with this time an Indigenous name. So I found other people, Aboriginal people, that were living and working around the places where my great-great-grandmother lived. Her name was Queen Susan of Welltown. So Welltown was like a large sheep property that she lived on, and it was a way of staying on her own country, but she was given a title of Queen, which didn't have any real powers, but she was like a senior member of the people there and intermediary between the white pastoralists and her Aboriginal group, so they could share and relay information about what's happening in the surroundings with each other. And like you see a lot of Aboriginal male kings, but not many women had the title of a queen. And she got a breastplate with a name and the year made out of bronze that was given to her. But I read one story where she refuses to wear it because it was too heavy. I think she had other reasons for not wearing it, because it's quite meaningless in a lot of ways.
And could you talk about the genealogical chart has quite a linear structure, and then that changes as it moves up the wall. Could you tell us why that happens and where that structure comes from?
Yeah, so I was just looking at Western ways of visualizing things. So it's very linear. The tree is it begins very linear with horizontal and vertical lines to show the ascendancy and descendancy of people, which is something travelling anthropologist called Norman Tyndale, 1938, had an expedition through the entire continent, except for Northern Territory. I think he didn't really venture there. But he interviewed my great grandmother in a place called Bogabilla, and asked her who her family was, and drew a tree of that, which was very accurate, I found. But there's the Aboriginal family is a very different thing. It's people can have more than one mother and more than one father, according to their kinship systems. So it's this very different to a nuclear family in the Western sense. So the tree becomes less linear as it gets up, and it becomes more organic thing and circular as Indigenous ideas of time. It's also like a circular, non-linear thing where the past, the present and the future could exist in the same plane. And I think that's what the archive does as well, has the past in the present and will exist in the future. And all these paper records are being digitised, and who knows, they could be in some other format in the future sometime.
Great. I think that's a wonderful point to end on. Could you please join me in thanking Archie?
Thank you.
I'm now going to hand over to Fee Churchman, who's the senior editor at ArtReview, our partner for today's talks, to introduce the next panel.
Hello, everyone. Feels like a real honour to be able to share this space with you all today. And obviously, we are here to talk about how art might engage with the carceral systems and how, it might affect change in some ways and bring visibility to the situation. I'm very happy to be introducing Lorena Allen, who is Indigenous Affairs Editor at The Guardian, and Hank Willis-Thomas, who's an artist and co-founder of Full Freedoms, and Gülsün Kara-Mustafa, who is representing Turkey this year, with Hollow and Broken, A State of the World. It's a very moving installation, actually, and I think there are lots of resonances with Archie's Kith and Kin, particularly with relation to the way that personal and historical narratives converge. But I wondered if we could start with you, Lorena, if you could tell us a bit about your work with The Guardian and give us some context as to,
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's working.
Hello. No, that's working, yes. Okay, thank you. As Fee said, I'm Lorena Allam. I'm the Indigenous Affairs Editor at Guardian Australia. I'm a Kamilaroi and Bigambul woman. My family come from next door to where Archie's family are from, so we're like countrymen neighbours. I've been at The Guardian for about 5 years, and when I started, we wanted to look at a big project that we could do that really drove home the fact that very little has changed since the Royal Commission in 1991 into Aboriginal deaths in custody. As a young journalist, I covered that Royal Commission, so coming back to news after a long career elsewhere, I was shocked but not surprised that the very same issues I was reporting on in 1991 were still being discussed in coronial inquests in the present. My colleague Calla Walquist wanted to know exactly how many Aboriginal people had died in custody since 1991, and she couldn't find an answer to that question. We contacted every state and territory jurisdiction and they just weren't counting. We knew though that there was a very serious problem and that it hadn't abated since then. So we thought we would do the counting ourselves. So what we did then, our small team, is read through every coronial inquest report over a 10-year period from 2008 to 2018 in order to establish exactly how many Aboriginal people had died in custody. And then we also read non-Indigenous reports to provide a statistical comparison over that period. 470 reports we read and reread and measured against data points. This sounds very detailed and very clinical, but it was really just the beginning of a project that we wanted to do that explained to people the human cost of this ongoing institutional violence in Australia. We were able to establish that of that 470 people who died in custody, they were mostly young. They did not receive the care that they required. They were dying in very similar circumstances to those outlined in the Royal Commission. Most of our people were on remand. They hadn't been convicted of a crime. And they, I think I've already mentioned, but they did not receive the care that they required. Basic care. Coming into custody was almost a death sentence because the quality of health care that they received was so poor. Reading those reports was harrowing for me as a First Nations person. Just this stream of violence and neglect, and also challenging because I was attending and reporting on coronial inquests in the present day while we were doing this research. So it felt like the timelines were compressed and compounded. Also by the fact that there are members of my immediate family in that database and on the table in Archie's exhibition. So while we did that reporting, we also wanted to explain to people the human cost of it. We spoke to families of people who died in custody and reported their stories and their experiences of the carceral system. They were made to feel like criminals. They were made to feel like they had done something wrong. They were thrust into a process that was very foreign and alienating and compounded their trauma. It didn't provide them with the answers that they so desperately needed. We found that they were waiting up to 3 years for a coronial inquest to take place. So the 3 years after their loved one had died, they still had not seen any evidence of what took place. The questions remained in their minds about what happened to them. And often coronial inquests can drag on for years after, and when the reports are released, they provide very little relief to families. Coroners can only make recommendations, they can't change the system. And until individuals within that system, healthcare workers, police officers, prison guards, are held individually responsible for those deaths in custody. In my view, it will not change because it's the system, the institutional system rolling on. So I think what Archie is able to do with Kith and Kin is bring those people, our people who have died in custody, back to their ancestors and resituate them in the family tree and sort of bring them home, if you like, so that they're no longer just captive in a stack of paper. They belong to us again.
Thank you. Actually, just wanted to follow up on the idea of bringing attention to the human cost. Do you find, working with the broadsheet and reporting on this, what's the reception towards stories, human stories, and do you get any feedback, or is there,
So the Deaths Inside project that we worked on has shifted the dial very slightly in terms of the response from the public. There was one particularly high-profile inquest that we covered into the death of a Dungari man, David Dungay Jr., who really was the kind of flashpoint for the Black Lives Matter movement in Australia. When he passed, he cried 12 times, "I can't breathe," as he was held down by prison guards. His story really galvanised the Black Lives Matter movement in Australia. And so during COVID lockdowns, people defied the COVID lockdowns to spill out onto the streets and to protest his passing and the passing of many other Indigenous people. And I think our reporting and the reporting of other media really was a catalyst for that work.
Amazing. I think that's the job of journalism, right? Is to draw attention and to, I guess, bring a wider audience into understanding the situation and what's really happening. But I wondered, actually, Gyusen, if you might be able to talk about your work, because it's incredibly personal and draws on, that human story as well. If you want to.
Well,
does it need to be turned on?
I briefly wish.
Thank you.
I briefly wish to talk about a period of my lifetime, which really was a time with 3 coups d'etats, the military coups. I've been through them, and in all of them, me and my family was affected. The first time, the one which has happened in 1960, was finished up with the execution of the Prime Minister and 2 ministers together, executed by hanging. Through that time, my father was a radio person. He was the radio manager of programs, and he was also an announcer, reading the announcements, reading the words of this very special Prime Minister who has been hanged. So he had to be in prison for a while, because his only situation was to read his words, nothing else, but he stayed in prison for 7 months. The second one, which happened in 1971, actually I personally was affected, and my husband was affected. We were, I can say that we were student riots, and by the time, and I can say that we are this generation of 68, and by that time everything was demanded by street demonstrations and things like that, and we had so much to demand from the world. Throughout this process, of course, being in Paris and being in Turkey is a different situation. So we, as students, have been affected more and have been I have been detained again for a small while, for 6 months, and my husband for 2.5 years for hiding a fugitive in our house, and we spent this time in prison. Also, after that, we were expelled from our passports for 16 years. Well, actually, I'm going to talk about this small period which I spent in prison, because there was an outcome of this with a series of 15 paintings. I was sent to a normal prison, not a political prison, because, you know, my sentence was accepted, and I had to spend this time in a normal prison in, not in Istanbul, but nearby Istanbul. And this prison was a women's prison, a very special one, because in this prison there were the lifetime prisoners, you know, long time, long period they have to be in prison. And that was another experience for me, to see them, how they made a life for themselves in prison, which was very different from the others. You know, you go to prison, you come out, you always have a vision of the outside, but these women were living there, and they were really having one life which should be ending in prison. There were 60 women in a ward, and also 15 children. Some of them were born in this ward, and well, they were having a jolly life. That was very interesting to witness that. Of course, they were taking me a little weird person in between, because I was coming from the political background. And yeah, that was what we have lived, a short period. That was one of the very, very important experiences in my life. I wanted to record it, but inside there was no possibility. It was a very big chaos going on with children and women, the daily life and so on. But when I got out of prison, I thought something should be done about this, and I really tried to record it with some paintings. Well, they were done not in the sense of, you know, just for keeping the memory. And later, I left them alone. I didn't touch for a while, and that while is a very long time, because I didn't touch them for 40 years until I had a big exhibition in Turkey. There was so much going around me that I would never have thought of bringing them out and showing them in a gallery show or anything. That would have been a great exploitation against my friends who were still in prison by then. So this memory, which came out after 40 years, I think was very precious, because this gave us a notion, a vision, and anything you can think of which has been lived in a period of lifetime in a country.
Mm-hmm. And how did you decide to finally show the paintings?
Sorry?
How did you finally decide to show the paintings?
To decide to show these paintings was very interesting. I was going to have this exhibition with all my works that I have done in 2014 in Istanbul. Well, by chance, we took out this file with the curator. They were there, and the curator said, yeah, this is something very important. We should take it out and show it. Mm. Then this is how we decided, you know. Yeah, this is it.
Thank you. I guess it's sort of quite interesting to hear from both of you about how you represent your own experiences, but also other people's experiences, and sort of the ethics involved with that. And I wondered, Hank, maybe if you could talk to us about what you're doing with For Freedoms and how you manage that.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Hank Willis Thomas. Thank you for all that you have shared. Thank you, Archie, for being the reason that we're all convening today. I think it's so important for us to think about artists as civil servants, because what we do is a civic service, and that where we work, our studios are the research labs of today, yesterday, and tomorrow. And what often is missed, because we're not seen as playing a central role to the evolution of the human experience, is what actually happens if there wasn't that chance encounter with a curator who cared for you to pull something that you'd forgotten to show that was important. Like, there wouldn't be, well, we wouldn't be here today. And I think it's important for there to be more platforms for people to have access to what's happening in an artist's mind or in a studio outside of the safe spaces of galleries and museums, where a lot of people frankly don't feel safe. And so my collaborators, artist collaborators, and I created first what was called the Super PAC, which is a political action committee, but then a for-profit and then a non-profit organization. They just shift because, you know, people get scared of titles, so we just changed the title of the organization so we can be seen as accessible to, but with the agenda of putting critical discourse into political discourse through fine art thinking. And so over the past 8 years, primarily in the United States, but also in probably 7 other countries, we've done exhibitions, town halls, and billboards, but we've done over 700 billboards with 500 artists, really just taking their art practice and putting it on billboard spaces. And also, we believe that if you call something art, it invites people to think creatively about things they already know. And if you call something political, it implies that there's something at stake. So that we've really just decided to just make that space for hopefully art that falls short of propaganda, because we believe good art asks questions rather than answering them. And the virtue is that the value, how good the question is, kind of dictates how good the answers are. And we believe that judges and lawmakers are actually designers who design our society, and they don't think about designing our society in creative ways. For instance, in the United States, one of my collaborators on a project called Incarceration Nations, her name is Baz Dreisinger. Well, the project is called The Writing on the Wall, where we've included thousands of writings that she's collected from prisons in Australia and in Hong Kong and the United States and Norway and Brazil to make various installations. But she talked about how in the United States that we've made justice a synonym for revenge, and we don't acknowledge that revenge can never undo the harm. Actually, it can only do more. And what I believe the role of many of us who see ourselves as creative is to find new ways to create healing, spaces for healing, methods for healing, and also methods for transforming our own experience and to evolve so that we may be able to look forward 65,000 years. So that's a lot of what we've been doing.
Mm-hmm. Are there any projects that you've seen have actually had an impact, and with the judges, with the people who are part of the system?
I would say yes. However, I only care about impacting people's hearts, and sometimes the mind is a lot slower than the heart. You know, sometimes my heart knows something and my brain does not necessarily agree. And so I think there's also this desire, and I appreciate what you've done and the research, and also the way that metrics kind of can be important in looking into it, but as also you said, for some reason it's not enough, and so art also hopefully can bridge that gap. And so I'm not going to speak about Four Freedoms, but another project that I'm a part of by a lawyer named Brian Stevenson. He created this equal justice initiative with the agenda of liberating people who were wrongly incarcerated, but also realized through 30 years of working in the criminal injustice system in the United States that it wasn't enough to just win cases. And so he created in Montgomery, Alabama, this National Memorial for Peace and Justice, first to acknowledge the victims of lynchings in the United States, especially African-American victims of lynching. There were many others. But then also the first ever museum of slavery to commemorate slavery and mass incarceration, and connecting the history of slavery in the United States to mass incarceration. And then they opened a park that's 17 acres with hundreds of artists' work. In Montgomery, Alabama, if you don't know, was the seat of the Confederacy, which fought the Civil War to uphold slavery in the United States. And now it's become the greatest tourist attraction is for people to go and learn about the history of slavery and mass incarceration. It's also where Martin Luther King first was an influential figure in the bus boycotts that kind of were really influential in the civil rights movement. But it's fascinating for me to see a lawyer who chose art. I forgot to say I'm an artist, and that he's used the artist tools and artists to be like almost, I feel like I'm in his palette, I'm a paintbrush or something. But our work to tell the story, and the fact that 300,000 people go to this town now to learn about this and to have certain healing and come together, really, to me, is a way that he's redesigning civic life through using art as a tool.
And can I ask what, sorry, were you going to?
No, go first.
I just wanted to ask what the sort of catalyst for working on this was for you, like how you sort of came to it.
On which?
On your practice, on this, you know.
Well, my mother, Deborah Willis, is an artist and art historian. She's a photographer, or she was studying photography, and she asked her professors around about black photographers in the 1970s, and they could only name two, and her professor gave her their homework and invited her to do a research paper on the history of black photographers. And she found that there was a legacy going back to 1839 of African Americans making pictures, which really rewrote part of American history. And so she spent her entire career kind of sharing these stories, and because black people photographed black people very differently than mainstream society. And so this weekend, for anyone who wants to come, there is a Black Portraitures conference that my mother is doing on Saturday and Sunday here in Venice. You can find it online. And so I'm just like, I just along for the ride.
Okay, so
I just kind of like grew up around this and felt like I was been home.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a connection between everyone here, that it's very much about looking at the human stories and things that go, you know, told and untold, the things that are erased. And I'm sure, like, you know, maybe you could say a bit more about what you do, Lorena, in telling those stories. And
I think what Hank said about making people feel something and speaking to the heart rather than the head is how change does happen, and it's all incremental. We know it's slow, but making people feel something is so much more important and powerful than, you know, the work that we've done on reporting and data is really just a layer, the bottom layer of a process. So what artists can do is take that information and make it into something that will make people feel. So it's hard for journalism. I mean, journalism is really about truth-telling if it's done properly. And Indigenous journalists, First Nations journalists, tell truths in the workplace and in our reporting. We have two bosses, if you like. We are responsible to our communities, our families, and we have to also uphold the ethics of journalism. So I think what we bring is context to our reporting that non-Indigenous reporters just do not have. We have an understanding of our long history, and we think about that every time we ask a question, every time we write our reports. We're not... So if, I'd like to think we do it right. When it's done right, we bring that knowledge into the present with us in ways that non-Indigenous reporters don't do. Mm-hmm. The story selection, the people we talk to, all of those issues are very important. And so when we write or report on deaths in custody, for example, the first people we go to are families. We don't talk to, that's the first, their story is the heart of our reporting. And I personally feel very responsible to them and protective of them, making sure that they are aware of how they're going to be portrayed, have a say in that, have a say in the photographs that are taken of them, have a say in the way that they are presented, the reporting about them. I find that very important. Because the process of being reported on can be very dehumanising, as well as the coronial process and all of the other experiences that they are enmeshed in, not of their own making.
Yeah, and it's a huge responsibility that you have to do justice to telling these stories. And Gisson, maybe we could talk a bit more about your painting series in terms of that responsibility of how you portray the experiences of the women that you were with, and
Well, I think what I have told you is a small story about about some paintings that might be forgotten if not been put into light. I think we should work more on the memory archives, and we should definitely be more keen on bringing the memories out, because sometimes, especially in those countries who are really more able to forget, this should be done more keenly, and we should definitely try to evoke an atmosphere that we should make efforts not to forget.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you talked about sort of creating a memory archive, because it sort of resonates with writing on the wall, which is an art installation, but those are people's stories, and you are creating an archive in a way.
Yeah, well, I grew up in archives, and so that's part of it. Also, another project I've been doing is called the Gun Violence Memorial Project, where we've been collecting artifacts from people who were murdered by guns in the United States. We're in the United States, which is branded as the land of the free, imprisons more people than in anyone else in the world. And it describes itself as a safe and just society, but more people are shot and killed in the United States every year than almost anywhere in the world, than anywhere in the world that is not a war zone. 50,000 people are shot in the United States every year and killed, which is just insane. And no logic, no storytelling so far has really made an impact on it. But I understand that my survival and survival of many people depends on it. And so thank you for, can I ask one question? You said that there were 3 coups. You didn't talk about the third one.
The third one, probably I should not well, I can say that that was the most worst of it, and yeah, nothing to say more.
Which year, though?
It was 1980, just 60, 71, and 80, following each other. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was not involved in it. I was involved through the events and things like that. I haven't been detained, but you know, you're always in it, and you have to survive. You know.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience was of being detained?
Experience
Of being detained.
Of being detained.
of being detained.
Yeah.
Well, that was a very short period, depending on the time, you know, because the detainees were staying about 10 years or more.
Right.
And for us, it was like, for example, my husband was in prison, and it was like waiting for him for 2.5 years. That was some other experience, which we experienced with the other women whose husbands were in prison. So that is another organization, that is another feeling, that is another shared, yeah, that's another thing, you know, which we experienced throughout this time. And I think, you know, for the others who are in prison, this feeling of being outside is being like, you know, have I done less than that? You know, that was another feeling that we experienced because they were there and we were out. So that balance was very interesting.
Yeah, and that's something that you were also talking about, Lorena, earlier, which is about how, I mean, in a way, you know, it's important to highlight the family's experiences as well. And I don't know if, like, maybe you want to talk about working with those families and...
Yes. Well, it's challenging because some of these coronial hearings are about family members. So my relatives, I'm going to coronial inquests with cousins and aunties and, you know, cousins whose grandchildren have died in custody. So we're never far away from the subject. You know, we live it. It's not like a job. You know, this is our lives and our deaths that we're, you know, being expected to and wanting to bear witness to, you know. So it is a very personal thing. You know, in our home lives, we go and visit other relatives in jail. So this, I mean, when Gulson talks about the, you know, you're saying you're out but the others are in, you're still in there with them, right?
Yes,
you're in that
course,
double, you're in that existing in both spaces at once. And Aboriginal people, Islander people feel that very keenly as well because our loved ones are in there and we worry about their safety because we know that jail can be a death sentence for our people. It happens over and over again. And the other thing that Hank said was really important is that journalism and storytelling is really not enough. Projects like the ones that you've described have much more impact on people's... it gives people a space to feel in a way that they don't when they'll read a news report. You know, sometimes journalism is a way for people to... they can conceptualise something in their head, but it doesn't shift the dial. So, sorry, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just also feel like journalism and publishing of journalist work is different because the publications have an agenda that's different than often the journalists, especially someone like you.
Right. That can be, yeah, that's what I said about the inside the newsroom issues, that there is a struggle there as well. At the Guardian Australia, we've done some big projects in terms of Indigenous affairs that I'm really quite proud of, that I don't think have been done before. So apart from Deaths Inside, we also did, working with the University of Newcastle, a map of the massacre history of Australia. That's the kind of journalism work that I don't think many people would have had the guts to do. But Guardian Australia was prepared to do it. We traced the entire... we used the information that the university researchers had created to build a map, a searchable map of all known massacres of Aboriginal people over the period of colonisation. And again, we started with a methodology. This was another database project that had a human side as well, but we only used massacre sites where more than 6 people were killed, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of them on that map. So it gives you just an idea. It's another way of telling history, I guess. It's public history. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of journalism that I am most proud of. But it's rare. It's very, very rare. And as you say, it's not always appreciated within our newsrooms. Just very fortunate that The Guardian Australia was willing to and wanted to do this work.
Mm-hmm. And Hank, how might we move forward in terms of like how art can encourage civic engagement with injustices in the carceral system?
Well, the core of every artist's journey and every seeker or lover of art is a search for liberation. And some people have sadly found greater liberation and been gateways to liberation for many of us through their experiences in prison. But during their time, they were not seen as a human being. And I struggle to imagine, and this is part of the problem, because if we can't imagine it, we can't actually design it or create it. Thinking about the cast that has been created through generations of slavery and incarceration, how do we begin to acknowledge the harm that some of those people have caused, but the kind of unfathomable harm that's been inflicted upon so many that is invisible to us? Like, I would not have known, even though you were only in prison for a little bit. That's the fact that you have to minimize your own experience in order, because someone else's was long. Like, I can't even imagine, and I don't want to have to know. But I'm inspired by the fact that certain people have found this. You said we have to survive, and art was your pathway. And now we're here at the Venice Biennial, about to see your pavilion open in 2 hours. Yeah. Which says a lot. And so I don't know if I have any answers, but I have guide markers around me.
Well, this question always comes to me like, what can art do? Art can never do anything, or cannot be the only situation that can survive things, you know. But art can keep a memory. I believe in this, you know. It's a good archive. So, well, this is what I can say.
I think that's quite a good place to end. Or did you want to?
I just wanted to bring it back to Archie's work, which is an archive as well. It's a new archive for us, and a really powerful one, because it's very Aboriginal. Like it's bringing us all together and connecting us to the everywhen, you know, through space and time, from our ancestors to now.
Thanks, Lorena. I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much to all of you, and thanks for coming to this talk. Yeah.